Ladies and gentlemen, ships at sea, children of all ages, and most importantly, football fans all around the world, this is one of those things that's been on my bucket list, right? I've said to myself, I can die a happy man if I can finally get Clint R. Lamb on the show. I am one step closer to resting comfortably in my grave. Yes, we
How
are.
you doing, Bill?
Oh, it is a privilege, a joy, and a pleasure. So, I have been following you for a few years. My gateway drug to you was my friend Donovan. And I said, Donovan, who do you know who knows the Alabama program inside out, rooted to the tutor? He said, Clint Lamb. It's like, oh, awesome. So I've been following you for some time. Your stuff is great. You managed to handle a fan base that could best be described as cultish, um, in a way that I think is both respectful but not reverent. And that's a difficult line to tread. So congratulations and good on you on managing to pull that one off. Um, Obviously, Alabama football is one of those things where it's almost redundant to say Alabama football, right? Because when you say Alabama to someone, they assume the next word is going to be football anyway. Uh, if you say something other than football after that, it takes them saying, "Oh, that's right. They have other things in Alabama." But people who don't live in Alabama only know Alabama for football for the most part. Tell me about what it is that makes, in your idea, in your mind, makes this program so, like, the word iconic is now overused. Special, different, unique, just different from everything else.
Oh, what a great question. I would say that when you've had, how often do you have two head coaches that come through who are in the debate for the greatest college football coach of all time? Like you had that success. Me growing up and stuff in the state of Alabama, I was born in 1990. It was post, very post Paul Bear Bryant. It was, my early years were the Gene Stallings years. So there was a national championship before, I could remember anything. And then it was a pretty big lull. They had some good seasons, no competing for championships until really Nick Saban got there, and I was a teenager. I guess
Right.
about to go to college, about to become a young adult. But it just the fact that you had that run that everybody talked about with Paul Bear Bryant and just national championship after national championship, and just the way the program was run and the way that Alabama fans viewed Paul Bear Bryant and the respect they had for him and what he was able to do, to essentially have that again with Nick Saban, I think is something. I mean, obviously, I understand the Paul Bear Bryant era more now as you witness the greatness of Nick Saban. And I think there's something to be said about witnessing this stuff in real time, rather than just going back and watching games that you already know the outcome to, or looking up stats. So I think from a fan's perspective, people throw around the word spoiled, but I mean, how could you not be? And I think Georgia's starting to get that a little bit. And the more success that they have, the more that they're going to realize that it's national championship or bust. The years where you don't make it or you don't win it, it's like everybody else will say, "Hey, this is a great season," but you don't feel that way as a fan. So it's a program that's been built on success for decades. They've had some dark moments, but I mean, I just don't think that any other program out there to this degree, has experienced something quite like that.
Sure. I mean, Michigan's had a couple of Hall of Fame coaches. I mean, obviously, most of, I mean, I'm old, but I didn't watch Fielding Hurry Up Yost's teams. I did watch a lot of Bo Schembechler's teams, and poor Lloyd Carr, right? A terrific coach. I mean, if he's at Arizona State, they're building a statue, right? If he goes, there's all these places where if he'd been there, it'd be like, he's amazing. Unfortunately, don't be the man that follows the man. Be the man that follows the man who follows the man. Right? That's the advice they always give now. Like, don't be that guy that follows the legend. Which is why it's so much better to be Saban. Right? There was, as you mentioned, the lull. Which, if you're like Tulsa, what you call a lull would be like the great times, like where everyone is slaying the fatted calf, while instead it's sackcloth and ashes time in T Town. Uh, so let's dig into a couple of specifics about Alabama. So it's in a state, I don't have to tell you, as you said, you're native, where there's no big time professional sport, right? You're not going to go see the Alabama fill in the blanks in Major League Baseball. I don't think there's even an MLS franchise there, right?
Correct.
Okay. So, and I mean, I'm not going to make a funny hockey joke. I'm going to just let that go. So, essentially, so essentially, unless you're an Auburn fan, it's seemingly not only your sporting world, but even your social life kind of revolves around Alabama football. I know people who are, and you know what I'm talking about, who their whole existence practically revolves around Alabama football, and they have no direct connection to Alabama football other than that they either live in Alabama or they fell in love with Alabama football and they live someplace else. I know kids in New Jersey who live and die with Alabama football, like for
Absolutely.
whatever reason, right? Chicagoans. I know Chicagoans who live and die with Alabama football. Shout
Absolutely.
out to my boss's little sister, who's one of those people. So uh, let's dig in. So you've got this, like I said, cultural edifice, right? But far beyond a football program, a cultural edifice. And but as you said, it's national championships are bust. So it's been a bust by Alabama standards of late. And now you have, I mean, this is the moment, right? I mean, this is where, did Buster Douglas knock out Tyson? Like, where are we now? I mean, I know you've got your fingers pressed against a slightly more rapidly beating pulse than normal. Uh, how worried are Alabama fans about Georgia?
Well, I mean, I think that it's the biggest threat to the dynasty up to this point. I mean, because it's built in sort of Alabama's image and the fact that you
That's sort of
know
Clint. You can just flat out say it. It's essentially dupe, locate. It's which is what they say it's the highest form of flattery. Well, clearly it is the highest form of flattery because they've just copied your program almost, you know, every bit of it. Similar color scheme, coached, obviously on the coaching tree. You build the offenses and defenses so similarly that I bet if players could switch at halftime and recognize probably 80% of what they're doing. So yeah, you don't have to say sort of. It's
absolutely.
clearly the blueprint is being followed is the Alabama blueprint. So yeah, sorry, continue.
Absolutely. And that's what's wild about it is that, I feel like Alabama tries to get back to doing what it was that they were doing previously, which is running the football, playing bully ball, doing all those different things. And you know, that to the outside world looks like they're trying to mimic Georgia when really it was Georgia that built its program in the image of Alabama. And there's nothing wrong with that, by the way. I mean, some of the most successful people in any facet of life, they took somebody that was ultra successful in that field, they studied them, they learned what it is that made them successful, and they implemented it themselves. There's nothing wrong with that. Kirby Smart's got a lot of respect for Nick Saban. Nick Saban's got a lot of respect for Kirby Smart and his ability to do that. But it's just those two programs. I mean, you see Georgia and you see the fact that Kirby Smart is so much younger than Nick Saban, and he seems to be on his way up, while Nick Saban at this point, I wouldn't say he's on his way down yet by any means. I think that there's still some that we need to see in order to say it's on a downward trajectory. But at the same time, it's gone on for close to 2 decades. I mean, it can't last forever. Everybody knows that. And so I think that just witnessing, when you've had this amount of success for this long, there are fans who have been paying attention to Alabama football really only during this era. Like they're not going to know what to do with themselves once Nick Saban's not there. And the hope is that you can find somebody who can, replace Nick Saban enough. That's the problem, is that even in Nick Saban's down years at Alabama, for a lot of coaches, that's going to be kind of the ceiling, and you're going to win a national championship every once in a while. And so I think the expectations have gotten a little bit, understandably so, but they're a little bit out of hand. And so, yeah, I think there's some fear there, but I don't think anybody's ready to throw in the towel and say it's over. And that's what, this year, in my opinion, it's about trying to get Alabama back to where it was. And, we'll see if it ends up working out.
Yeah. So I'm joined, of course, also by my co-host, the babyface assassin Brock Vieira. This, my friend, is Clint R. Lamb. And if you wanted to understand, and the term I use is the cultural edifice that is Alabama football, because it's not just a football program. It is I know the SEC loves to put itself on a pedestal, which sometimes is warranted, sometimes it's not. But for Alabama, it makes sense because, as we mentioned before, unless you're an Auburn fan, and that's of course the great exception, so much of every part of people's existence is built around what's going on. There are people who follow who the three sports they follow are Alabama football, Alabama spring ball, and Alabama recruiting, right? Those are their three sports. I'm not
You were
even
correct.
joking. You know what I'm talking about? Like
Absolutely.
that's it, right? So when you said I need to see more before I know that sort of the the wheels are coming off, that is that two losses? Like for Alabama standards, what is the sign that now we're in real trouble?
Okay, here's the thing. I think that Nick Saban was trying to stay ahead of the game. And he's always been willing to adjust and adapt to the current landscape and environment. And so I think, and that's been something that's actually helped him as far as the longevity of Alabama's dynasty is the fact that he's been able to adjust to the ongoing changes in college football, whether it be hurry up offenses or the transfer portal or NIL or whatever. But I think he kind of misstepped a little bit when he decided to go from this big, burly, physical, guys in the trenches to trying to get a little bit smaller, more athletic, be able to handle the spread offenses, the RPOs. And if you're going to do that offensively, I mean, you're going to want to do that defensively too, because that's 80% of what college football is. Uh, but I think that he realized very quickly because, and I'll give Kirby Smart a lot of credit, he stayed committed to what it was that him and Nick Saban did successfully at Alabama. When he got to Georgia, he says, we're not going to do all this stuff that everybody else is doing. We still think that the way that we've built this, that we're going to build this program and the way that we helped build it at Alabama, I still think that stuff can work. And Kirby Smart was correct. And so I think Nick Saban has identified that. I mean, Georgia's won back-to-back national championships, not getting smaller and scoring 55 points a game and throwing the football all over the place. It's playing elite defense. It's defense wins football games according to Georgia, and that's certainly played a huge role in their success. And it's being able to run the football, push people around with a big offensive line. And so with Alabama trying to get back to that, if they're able to do that successfully, then I just think it was a misstep along the way. He's countered. He's going to recruiting bigger offensive linemen. He's putting, an emphasis on 12 personnel and running the football and, how that complements your defense and can help your defense. And so if he's able to do that, then, I think it was a blimp on the radar. If he tries this or he tries to get back to that and Alabama just can't seem to get it, that's when I'll say, okay, I think that, the dynasty is in serious trouble here.
Got it. I'm going to throw it open to my co-host Brock. What questions before we dig into the matchup itself we're about to discuss? But what sort of general Alabama questions do you have before we focus on the upcoming game?
So I've been following this Alabama program for quite a long time, even before Nick Saban got there. And the transition that you guys went from the days of Mike Shula to now is remarkable. With that being said, I think that we are at this weird precipice that reminds you of 2004, where the SEC in general is at an incredible point in terms of competition. How is Alabama going to handle the rise of Hugh Freeze and Josh Heupel in Tennessee and continue to try and deal with Georgia, some of these other teams, as other teams try to become, much better than they were in previous years?
Well, I think that, when Nick Saban was first hired at Alabama, I remember hearing a story. I don't know if it's, I'm pretty sure it's accurate, but I don't know 100%. But it was essentially when Mal Moore went to pick him up down in Miami and bring him back to Tuscaloosa after he had agreed. He said, I don't know if I don't think I'm a great football coach, but no one's going to out recruit me. And I think that that's been the priority is you've got to get the players on campus. And that's why I think Deion Sanders is going to have a lot of success at Colorado. I thought he would have been a great choice for Auburn. I thought Hugh Freeze was a great hire. He was, I thought it was either Deion Sanders or Hugh Freeze, either one. Now, Lane Kiffin also, would have been in that mix, but I wasn't sure if he would leave Ole Miss. But as far as viable candidates, I thought, if you're Auburn and you're, trying to go up against Georgia and Alabama as far as recruiting, I mean, what better that, if you're right there on the Georgia border, Georgia Alabama state line, what better guy, than to have a former Atlanta Falcon going into the Atlanta area or Georgia in general in recruiting, because you have to get the horses, and then it's about development. And I think that, Deion's done a good job of hiring the right people to help him on the coaching side of things as he learns and adapts. But you got to get the players. That's first and foremost. And with NIL, one thing about it, and it's not just NIL, it's really transfer portal. Transfer portal is the main aspect of this. It's the fact that you can't build the level of depth at any program that Alabama has had since Nick Saban arrived, because it's just, there's too much going on as far as before you had, a third string, receiver who was, good enough to start at 80% of the programs out there, more than that, 90% of the programs. But, if he transfers, he's got to sit out a year. Nick Saban, pitches, hey, go through the process, learn, develop. We've got a lot of guys ahead of you, but you will learn. And when you get on the field, you'll be playing at a high level just like they were, and you'll get drafted, extremely high. Now I don't have to wait. And so it's constantly, I think that's a big reason why you see a lot of rotation out of Alabama. Like, 4 tight ends are going to be playing on Saturday, 4 running backs, 6 receivers at least, if not 7. There's positions where you want a lot of rotation, but even at positions where you don't really see it too much. Offensive line. Last year, they started rotating Tyler Booker in and had 3 guards kind of rotating with each other, because that's the world of college football. If guys aren't playing, it's difficult to keep them. And so I think that is what's made it so difficult, at least as of late, to, combat what's going on in college football. Alabama's going to be one of the premier programs as long as Nick Saban's there. They're going to have one of the elite recruiting classes every single year. They're going to get good development. They're going to send guys to the NFL. But as far as this advantage of having a level of depth that nobody else had, that doesn't exist today.
Absolutely. So part of the structure that that helped contribute to Nick Saban's success is obviously the depth, but also the health of his players. And one of the people that was behind that was Scott Cochran, longtime strength and conditioning coach, worked with him at Alabama, at LSU. We all know he went to Georgia in 2020. Do you think that Nick Saban and the Alabama football program is still reeling from the loss of Cochran, or is that now a thing of the past?
Yet again, another good question. Right there at the end, Alabama was dealing with a lot of injuries, pretty much every year. And a lot of people were blaming Scott Cochran. I think it was just a luck thing. They had dealt with some pretty devastating losses, though. I mean, before before one year, you had Tua get hurt, and he eventually got hurt. But before the year even started, you had Dylan Moses go down with a season-ending knee injury. It was like your most important player offensively and your most important player defensively both go down with injuries at some point during that 2019 season. That's going to affect things. And it had been several years of losing some key guys. And I mean, obviously, you make the switch. You've got new people in there, and you lose John Mechie, you lose Jamison Williams. So how much is it? How much is it just unfortunate injury luck, and how much is it, the way that you structure your strength and conditioning program? I think Alabama wants to be on the cutting edge as far as, sports science and getting athletes their body in peak physical condition. But that is something that, I think Scott Cochran, as far as being kind of a face of the program, an energy guy, it was very tough. He wouldn't let guys, the problem that Alabama had before, I don't remember what game it was. I guess maybe Tennessee, where Nick Saban questioned. He was like, typically they're very rah-rah, the players and stuff before they go out, onto the field, they were quiet, and that concerned him. And I think that when you had a Scott Cochran around, that was very difficult as far as just players, energy levels being that low and not having this excitement and having a lot of anxiety. I think Cochran really helped in that area. So I do think that it had an impact. But I also think that, there are other factors involved, but you got to give Scott Cochran credit. He was a good strength and conditioning coach for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm a big fan of Scott Cochran, so I want to bring him up. Shout out Scott Cochran. Since he moved over to Georgia, Georgia has won the 2021 Peach Bowl and then 2 straight national championships. Going back to the SEC, I just want to, have some honest dialogue about the conference in general. I think, personally, the SEC, especially the division Bama plays in, the SEC West, has some of the most overrated head coaches in college football, excluding Nick Saban. I'll make that point very clear. Now, Lane Kiffin is a great offensive mind, but none of his daddy's defensive guru ever seemed to rub off on him in terms of building a sound defense. Texas A&M, Jimbo Fisher. Need I say more? Mississippi State. We don't really know Zach Arnett because obviously he's brand new into a situation that no one really wants to ask for or how he was promoted to be a head coach. Arkansas, big fan of Sam Pittman, but I think we've already seen Arkansas ceiling. And do not get me started on Hugh Freeze. I think that he is one of the biggest phonies in all of college football. However, you see these teams in from a much different perspective. Do you agree with my assessment that these are overrated coaches in this division, or do you think that even Brian Kelly? But if we talk about Brian Kelly, we're going to be here for an hour. That these coaches are overrated, or do you think that these coaches can pose a significant threat to Nick Saban in terms of beating him consistently?
Well, I think that's the challenge, right? Is who out there is going to beat Nick Saban consistently? And Auburn's approach is, hey, Hugh Freeze is a very successful offensive mind. He's very innovative. He plays to his players' strengths. And he's beaten Nick Saban multiple times, including back to back. Like how many coaches can say, not only did you get Nick Saban the first time, but then you played him again with that when you had that revenge factor in Alabama for the longest under Nick Saban, the revenge factor in football games. I mean, it would get ugly for people. A lot of people thought last year that Texas A&M was going to catch a beating based off of the offseason feud between Jimbo Fisher and Nick Saban, but also the way that Alabama lost in dramatic fashion in College Station the year before. Everybody thought, Texas is going to catch it, Texas A&M is going to catch it, and they didn't. They battled. So I think that's kind of gone away a little bit, but Hugh Freeze was doing it in the middle of a period where it was very tough to beat Alabama 2 times in a row. It's one guy that I didn't hear you mention, and you may have, I just missed it, but, when you talk about, I wouldn't say overrated necessarily. I do think, I'm trying to be politically correct here and not be too, critical of people, but Jimbo Fisher to me, when you talk about overrated, we won the national championship at Florida State, hopefully, bringing in, I'm drawing a blank on his name, but it'll come to me. Petrino, hopefully bringing him in, the offense is able to get on track. I think they showed some positive signs on that front, but that is a guy also who I would throw in that conversation as far as the way that he's viewed as like a top 5 to 10 coach. Does he deserve to be up there? Now, here's what I will say about all of them. I think as far as, Ole Miss with Lane Kiffin, if it's one reason I thought Lane Kiffin would have been a good hire for Auburn. It's the same reason I think Hugh Freeze was going to be a good hire. It's if you're going to be at that program and you're going to be going against not only Alabama, and Alabama's the main one, but also Georgia, you have to have a fearless coach, someone that's not going to get rattled by the pressures that come along with that. Lane Kiffin just has a personality where he doesn't really get rattled. So with a lot of these coaches, the problem is, who else are you going to go get that is going to be able to stack up? And I think, when you look at the SEC in general, there's some question marks about some programs. Eli Drinkwitz at Missouri, I guess he's a guy who, could be on his way out. We'll have to wait and see. Billy Napier, I think, he's still got to show some things at Florida. They're not going to put up with, the kind of things that we're seeing early out of them this year for very long. But overall, I think a lot of the SEC schools have kind of the right guy in place, because I can't think of anybody else that would be better. But at the same time, if the standard is, can you compete with Alabama year in and year out and beat Alabama consistently, I think that's difficult for anybody.
Yeah, I completely agree with your majority of your assessments, and I want to make things very clear. I understand why you would say that in the way that you said it, but I am not politically correct on this show, so don't fear that you have to be, because I definitely am not. I think Jimbo Fisher is the most overrated coach in college football. I think he was gifted a gem of a program from Bobby Bowden at Florida State, and really only just let it, kept it steady enough in order to win a national championship that he had to have a ridiculous amount of lucky breaks to win, with one of the most loaded rosters of all time. Just off of my head, yeah, Jameis Winston, Dalvin Cook, Devontae Freeman, Kelvin Benjamin, Timmy Jernigan, Ronald Darby, Jalen Ramsey. A lot of guys that had great careers or continue to have great careers. in the NFL were on that team. And since then, he's done nothing with it. Should I bring up DeAndre Francois? Should I bring up Everett Golston and then the loss to Texas Tech? Should I bring up the fact that he has had zero improvement with the Aggies than from Kevin Sumlin? I think he sent one first rounder to the NFL in Kenyon Green. Sumlin sent 7. Sumlin has 1 New Year's 6 win. Same thing with Jimbo that came during the COVID year. There's nothing about Jimbo Fisher that screams successful, and we don't even know if he has a quarterback yet. We think Weidman is finally the guy, but his best quarterback so far has been Kellen Mond. That's not really the sign of a great quarterback developer, especially when you look at the track records of guys like David Cutcliffe, Jeff Tedford, so on and so forth. So when everyone wants to give him all these praises, I don't understand where that comes from. There's 2 coaches that I think can honestly compete with Nick Saban. That's Josh Heupel, but I don't, not just because of last year, but because his first year they were competing when they played in Tuscaloosa that year. I mean, Velus Jones Jr. was going off that game, if my memory serves me right, and Kirby Smart. But I don't really believe in Kirby Smart as much as other people, and here's why. Kirby Smart needed both John Mechie and Jameson Williams to tear their ACLs in order to beat Nick Saban. And Ajayi Hall was the number 1 wide receiver on that field for the majority of that national championship game. I don't think I even need to bring up his name again to Alabama fans because they're still getting a little bit of flashbacks. But I think that Alabama's in a better spot than a lot of people think they are. The only concern is how long are they going to stick it out with Jalen Milroe? And I think it's going to be a good intro into this next game. You guys brought in Tommy Rees as offense coordinator, which is an interesting choice, but when you want to come back to a run-dominant offense, it makes sense. But he also brought with him Tyler Buckner at Notre Dame, his original starting quarterback from last year. How long of a leash does Jalen Milroe have before he's benched?
I think he's got a pretty decent leash, but at the same time, that's difficult to say because I do think that the coaching staff has been impressed with the progress of Tyler Buckner. I do think that there's some confidence there if they needed to turn to him that he could be able to get the job done. This offense, from everything that we know, now we didn't see it against MTSU because MTSU sold out against the run. I mean, that's a lot of people will question how was Alabama not able to dominate the line of scrimmage against a program or a defense like the Blue Raiders, and it was everything that they were doing was just they were going to take away the run game. And finally, Alabama, I don't think they wanted to reveal too much as far as their vertical passing ability with Jalen Milroe in that football game. But the fact that they were having some limited success offensively, you want to build confidence. And you also want to put it on tape that Jalen Milroe is capable to some degree of being able to do more than just run the football and make Texas prepare for that. They started taking advantage of what MTSU was providing them, and they had a lot of explosive plays downfield. And I think, with Milroe, I was impressed with the progress that he made. Now, granted, we'll find out more Saturday. I'm encouraged by what I saw because here's the thing. Even last year against Austin Peay and, Utah State and, Louisiana Monroe and some of these smaller programs that Alabama played that Milroe would get in, he always had that one decision that was just, what are you doing? What did you see? It's things that you can't have happen from your starting quarterback. You got to start there. You can't have those sort of mistakes. And even in those low pressure situations, he was making them, at least one a game. And he was having a lot of trouble in that Texas A&M game as far as pre-snap recognition, knowing where the defense was lining up, what he needed to check. And I mean, that was a lot of Alabama's problem offensively. It wasn't just the turnovers. Everybody will point to that as a problem. But to me, the most glaring issue was the fact that he wasn't seeing what he needed to see pre-snap to put Alabama in a position to be successful. I saw improvement on that front. I don't think he's made enough improvement. I still think that is an area that he's still growing, but at least he's heading in the right direction. And I think that if he continues to get more and more experience, if he can get that cleaned up, the athleticism is on a completely different level. One of the fastest players on the team, one of the strongest players on the team, pound for pound. And, he's got a capable arm that's able to make all the throws. It's, can he see the right things and can he get the football to a lot of playmakers? Alabama likes their playmakers at tight end, at running back, at receiver, a lot of depth, a lot of rotation. And Alabama, the coaching staff wants quarterback who can distribute the football and allow them to make plays. I think now that you're in the season, you can't have as much of a commitment to that. You've got to win football games however you can. And if that's with Jalen Milroe's legs, having that +1 in the run game and having somebody else that can take attention from the defense, that can help your run game in a variety of ways. So I do think there's benefits of Jalen Milroe, and I think that he's growing. And so until I see him do something catastrophic, I don't think he's going to get pulled because neither one of these other two guys with Buckner and Ty Simpson, neither one has done enough to say, hey, I deserve this job. Give it to me. So until Milroe is doing consistently things that's going to get you beat, I don't know that they'll necessarily turn away from him. But at the same time, Texas, we still don't know what Jalen Milroe is. I was encouraged by his week 1 performance, but like I said, we'll know a lot more come Saturday.
Yeah, and as I mentioned, it's a perfect segue into this matchup. Texas and Alabama last year was very interesting because Texas played a lot better and Bama didn't play as good as I initially predicted. But in the end, Bryce Young was a Heisman winner for a reason. You guys marched down the field. Texas fans are still upset over a missed holding call that they said, since it was in the end zone, would have been a safety and basically given the game to Texas. I felt that Texas was the same old Texas. Sark will have 3 incredible quarters of coaching, and then when it's time to get into the clutch, he folds every single time. He melts every single time. I think this is exactly how this game is going to go. I think Bama and Texas are going to be close, and then Sark is going to fold. What is your predictions for this game this weekend?
Well, it's interesting because last year, my gut feeling was that the game was going to be close. It was going to be really close. And the comparisons that I made was to the 2021 Iron Bowl. Like they were both 20.5-point spreads. Both of them were on the road. Nobody was giving Auburn a chance. Nobody was giving Texas a chance. And, Auburn had the rivalry factor. Texas had the Steve Sarkisian factor and the fact that he coached under Nick Saban. And so there was just a lot of similarities there where I thought this could be a dogfight. And then I kind of, all week it's, everybody was saying that Alabama was going to kill them. And you're looking at it and on paper, it's like they should. It's a young offensive line, a really young offensive line. Alabama's, at the time it was week 2. We didn't know that, we thought Alabama was going to have one of the best pass rushes of all time. Going against that offensive line, you had Quinn Ewers, who was a young quarterback. There was just a lot of signs pointing to it being a blowout. And so I eventually came around and I said, okay, I think Alabama's going to win pretty handedly. This year, it's the exact opposite. My gut is telling me that Alabama's going to destroy Texas. Now, as I've looked at it and you look at the matchups, and it's like Texas is so good at so many positions. Now, I've compared this roster, and it is very similar in a lot of ways. There's some differences, some key differences, but it's very similar to like 2016 Washington, who Alabama played in the Peach Bowl in the first round of the playoffs. You had a really good quarterback with Jake Browning. You had Myles Gaskin. You had a couple of elite receivers in John Ross and Dante Pettis. You had an offensive line. I think 3 of their 5 starters are still playing in the NFL. You had Caleb McGarry there at right tackle. He was a first-round pick. Defensively, Budda Baker, Kevin King, Sidney Jones, Vita Vea, Elijah Qualls was a really good player. Big up front defensively, had the innovative offensive mind and Chris Peterson there calling plays. So, and when they got into that game against Alabama's defense, I think a key difference is Alabama's defensive front right now is not what it was in 2016 with Jonathan Allen and Deron Payne and Dalvin Tomlinson. So I do think that there's some differences, but I think the way that Alabama was able to lean on their run game and their defense, Jalen Hurts didn't have a great game. I think he barely totaled over 100 yards. I think he had like 57 passing and 50 rushing. So he didn't do a whole lot. He struggled quite a bit, but they leaned on the defense and the run game. Bo Scarborough had like 180 yards rushing. Alabama ends up winning. The defense has a defensive touchdown. They end up winning 24-7. I don't think it's going to be that low scoring, but I have said that I feel like things are setting up where Texas is on the right path to come into the SEC. They're building their roster in a very similar way to how Alabama would build theirs, or Georgia, defensively, offensively. And I think that they're in a pretty good position to make the transition, but I still think they're not quite there. So I think that, and this is another comparison I've made as far as this game is concerned. When you look at like Georgia versus Oregon last year, It was an early game. That was week 1. This is week 2. So there's some differences there, but it's a, top 3 ranked Alabama. It was a top 3 ranked Georgia. You had Oregon sitting right outside the top 10. Same with Texas. And Georgia going into last year, they didn't have this, reputation of being Georgia that could just reload and compete every year. There was question marks. They had lost a lot of talent defensively. People were wondering, could Stetson Bennett handle the workload without all the complementary pieces? And they ended up repeating. They used that Oregon game as kind of a launching point to physically dominate them up front, say, hey, we're still the same Georgia. And they ended up winning a national championship. So I could see Alabama doing something similar, not with that same score, but just announcing to the world, we are still Alabama and we can still dominate opponents that, are quality opponents. So I would say Alabama's going to cover the spread for sure.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. What I love about our guests is that they always come in with youthful enthusiasm, where I'm just a downtrodden, bitter old man at my young age. And I do not share the same analysis that you do with Texas. I think Texas is, for lack of a better term, a third world country with a Gucci belt on. They have all the glitz and glamour. They can have every star player they want, but internally, structurally, foundationally, they're awful. I think the Booster Club has too much influence on the football team. I think Steve Sarkisian is an overrated head coach. I think he's perfect as a play caller coordinator, but whenever given that head coach moniker, he doesn't perform at the standards. He's been outperformed at every other program he's been the head coach at, with both USC and Washington, by the head coach that immediately followed him, which is okay if it's Chris Peterson, but if it's was it Lane Kiffin or was it Clay Helton after him?
Helton.
Okay, it was Helton, right? Yeah, so if it's Clay Helton, you might have some problems, but shout out to Helton for what he's doing at Georgia Southern. I mean, I love Xavier Worthy. I love Jordan Winton. I love Quinn Ewers. I don't think Texas has the offensive line. I don't think they have the running backs anymore. I don't like their defense. Outside of that young kid, Anthony Hill, I'm not seeing a guy that has a shot at being a first-round potential. Texas hasn't had a good defense since Will Muschamp was there. And since then, Will Muschamp has been to two different programs as a head coach and been Kirby Smart's DC for a couple of years now, or assistant, or whatever you want to call it. I don't think Texas is set up to adjust to the SEC well, and I think it's going to be a major culture shock when they're going 4-9 every year, 5-7, so 4-8 every single year. Like I said, I don't share the same sentiment with Texas. I do think Bama is getting back to basics. The question for me is, over the years, like you mentioned, they haven't had the dudes on the interior, on either the offensive or defensive side of the ball. And Bama used to be a monster, a monster production factory for so long. Obviously, you guys brought in Landon Dickerson as a transfer from Florida State. Before he got hurt, he was looking incredible. Went to the league, having a great career. Evan Neal had a great career, went to the league. Alex Leatherwood, a little bit undersized, but still had a nice career, went to the league. Talk about that defensive side. You talked about Jonathan Allen. You talked about Payne. You talked about all those guys. And then even on the edge, you had Will Anderson last year. Then you also have Dallas Turner this year. But I don't have the same feeling these are monsters anymore. These are just big dudes. How does Bama go back to recruiting monsters again?
Well, I think that the main thing is the way that they're recruiting. They don't care about recruiting rankings. They have their own evaluation process. They're putting an emphasis on guys who love the game of football, and they're ultra talented. You got it like a Caleb Downs type of player who is as talented as any safety I've seen on tape at the high school ranks since I've been following this extremely closely, which has been coming up on, I guess, a decade. So, I mean, it's not like I have a ton of, a large sample size to go off of, but I feel like I have enough to say Caleb Downs is a very special player. He's going to be a very special player. Justice Haynes at running back loves the game of football. Very talented, but does all the little things correctly and has the right mentality. Guys like Tyler Booker, I haven't seen, I think Jedrick Wills is the closest I've seen, at least on the college level, of playing with that nasty mentality that you want out of an offensive lineman. Evan Neal, freak of nature when it comes to size, strength, athleticism to complement that and everything else. And he was an excellent player at Alabama, the highest drafted offensive lineman since Andre Smith to the Cincinnati Bengals in like 2009. So impressive player. But I even think, like a Jedrick Wills, the way that he played the game was more, if you can get more guys like that, you're going to be pretty good up front on your offensive line. Alabama, they're recruiting like 3-star guys right now and getting commitments, and they don't care because they're looking for big, physical, and they're looking for guys who play the game the right way. Defensively, I think that the right now the defense is built more around edge success and setting up their outside guys for to have success. So their interior defensive linemen, they obviously want impactful, disruptive players if they can get them, but it's more gap control, which has always been gap control to a degree. But they have really good players. They don't have elite players, and part of me thought, and still thinks, potentially that Jaheim Otis could be that next guy. But we haven't seen him be elite yet. We've seen him be good. He was good as a freshman, and he was good in week 1. Can he continue to build off of that and become a guy who just, who's the headache that Alabama has up front as far as their interior defensive line? Like, who is the guy that the opposing offensive coordinator is stepping on the field on any given Saturday saying, I have no idea how we're going to block this guy? And, even the Quinnen Williams of the world, who was phenomenal, very disruptive. That would be the last one that I would say that Alabama had where you viewed them that way. Before that, it was like they had somebody every year. And so I do think that, the defensive line, James Smith is a guy that, a lot of people have really high hopes for. He's a 5-star prospect. I think he's going to be a really good player. We'll have to wait and see. I love Jordan Renaud. He's one of my favorite signings that Alabama had in this 2023 recruiting cycle. But, that is a big question mark. I feel a lot more confident that the offensive line is trending back towards being the offensive line of old that bullied people up front and moved people in the run game and did all those things than I am with the defensive line, even though I think there's some good players up front defensively. They're going to have one of the better defensive lines in the country. You just might not have the impact players on the interior of the defensive line that maybe you've had in other years, in recent years. The edge play, good players, and they're recruiting that position at an extremely high level. So as long as they're doing that, I think they'll continue to get, maybe not necessarily Will Anderson every single year, but they're getting guys who can be pretty darn close.
So this is another natural segue. You talked about recruiting, and of course, recruiting nowadays doesn't just mean getting guys out of high school. We saw the impact that getting a guy from the Great Danes of Albany did for Florida State, right? I mean, I'm probably one of maybe 4 people who knew where Jared Verse was before he got to Florida State, because I was writing. I have a whole thing called the All Underappreciated Team, and he was on it 2 years, right? So he from out of the jump, I was like, who is this guy and why is he at Albany? But he was terrific, and so I was not shocked when he found his way, someplace other than there. But shout out to Albany helping to develop him. So the transfer portal giveth, and the transfer portal taketh away. Tell me about Alabama's biggest wins and losses coming into this season through the portal.
Biggest wins. Well, I'll start to say, we'll start with biggest losses because I think it's interesting. Alabama lost a lot of players. I mean, JoJo Earl, Javion Cohen, Amari Kite, Tommy Brockermeyer, a former 5-star #1 tackle in the country, right. Trey Sanders, who did some really good things in week 1 for TCU. Yeah. I think what's interesting is despite all these losses, because it goes beyond that. Trayshawn Holden, Kyrie Jackson, Jaquez Robinson, Traquan Fagans went to USC. They lost a lot of players who had a lot of star power coming out of high school as far as recruiting rankings. I will say, for one reason or another, and there's a variety of reasons why, but there's nobody that Alabama was particularly upset about losing, that they went out and actively tried to get them to come back, except for, based off of what I was told, Amari Kite. And that surprises a lot of Alabama fans. Nick Saban alluded to one player recently that they lost, that they didn't understand why he was leaving. From my understanding, that was Amari Kite. They thought that he could compete for the left tackle job. At the time, they didn't have Caden Proctor committed. I think he committed a couple weeks after Amari Kite chose to leave. But they thought that Elijah Pritchett, the young, ultra-talented freshman who was going to be a second-year player, competing with a veteran guy like Amari Kite, and if you're going to compete for a starting job at Alabama, why would you want to transfer elsewhere and compete there? And it was a competition that the coaching staff felt he could win. But outside of him, there was nobody, and that includes starters. Like, people wonder about Cohen and Earl, Nick Saban, thinks highly of all these guys. I'm not saying that it was a negative perception, but I think that, they were envisioning something a little bit differently with how the roster was built, and they were willing to let guys leave. You add some guys, certainly, and I think a lot of them are going to help. CJ Dupree has already been a big part of the offense. It hadn't led to targets yet, but I mean, as far as being a guy who can be a complete tight end, certainly a player, Jalen Key already making a huge impact at safety. Trey Amos and Key, after losing Jacquez Robinson and Traquan Fagans, I viewed them as major upgrades as far as your depth. And I thought they would compete for starting jobs, and they were told that they were going to be able to compete for starting jobs. But I thought, I didn't foresee them being every down starters. Trey Amos is not there yet, and I don't know that he will get there. I think he is certainly contributing, and he was great in week 1. So I think that he's one of the best depth corners in the country if he stays in that role, and he might not. But Jalen Key was a starter, and I was impressed with him at UAB, but I was really impressed with him in week 1. It's a huge loss for Alabama if he's not able to go on Saturday against Texas, which we still don't really know if that's going to happen. But the secondary, the fact that you added those two guys on top of what you had coming in with Caleb Downs, and even guys like Tony Mitchell who are making for good depth, and Des Ricks and other players, on top of some of the talent that you had already on the roster, despite the fact that you lost Jordan Battle and DeMarco Helms and Brian Branch and, Eli Ricks, this secondary is as talented as I've ever seen it. It's as deep as I've ever seen it. That depth is being tested already, but I think that they're, can withstand it. So I think the fact that they added Amos and Key, most importantly right now, were absolutely huge. And then at some point, if you have any issues with Jalen Milroe, which I don't foresee, I think he's going to stay in the starting quarterback from everything that I've seen so far. But, if you need to, you've added more depth and guys that you can trust, like a guy like Tyler Buckner.
Right. And once again, that leads me somewhat directly, because you just mentioned how they match up in that secondary going up against what is one of the strengths of Texas, which of course is their wide receivers, and depending on what day you catch them, their quarterback. So let's talk about that. When you looked at Texas and preparing for this matchup, which Texas players impressed you the most?
I would probably say Xavier Worthy's the number one guy. In Steve Sarkisian's offense, he's that receiver, that Jerry Jeudy, Devontae Smith, Henry Ruggs style of player. He's not overly big, 6'1", 175 pounds maybe. But the fact that Sark can move him around to create mismatches, he can play all three receiver positions. You're going to see him playing a lot in the slot. You're going to see him playing on the perimeter. He can, win and separate vertically, but also he's a really good route runner, and he can win at all three levels of the field. So he's certainly one that I've been impressed with. Sweat, the interior defensive lineman, that's another one I've been extremely impressed with. Massive body, 6'4", I think 260 pounds. Plays with, despite the fact that he's a pretty tall and lengthy guy, he plays with great pad level, great leverage, extremely hard to move in the run game. And I think he's going to play a pretty important role for how this game plays out. I think Alabama has some success running the football, but if they don't, I would imagine Sweat would be a big part of that. And then the other guy for me that probably stands out is Jatavian Sanders, the tight end, being 6'4", 250 pounds, not really an inline guy who's going to, block with, at any sort of high level, but very athletic, can run after the catch, quality route runner. And he's got, fantastic size. So he's definitely a mismatch problem who, will require a specialty defender in certain situations. And we'll see if Alabama has that defender on Saturday.
Got it. I'm going to find out what questions Brock might have before I start firing you some more ones. What else did you want to find out, Brock, heading into the Texas-Alabama game?
So one of the big differences that Alabama made in the offseason was obviously in the roster, but also in the coaching staff. If you look back at my tweets, I think I asked for Pete Golding to be fired on like 8 different occasions for like 3 different reasons. One was the DUI, and then the next is all football related issues. He's gone. You guys go out and bring in Kevin Steele, who's regarded as one of the best defensive minds in all of college football. What does Steele bring to this football team that makes you feel confident in this defense?
Truthfully, he's willing to push back on Nick Saban. I think that was probably Pete Golding's biggest issue. I think there was when you look at the coordinator differences, I think at times Bill O'Brien was too simplistic, and at times Pete Golding was too complicated in how, the things that he was asking his players to do. Just because you understand it, because you're a very intelligent coach, doesn't mean your players are going to understand it at a level in which they can implement it and do it and perform at a high level. So I think that there was some disconnect on that front, but at the same time, there's certain things that Pete Golding wanted to do that, Nick Saban would put his foot down and say no. And I think with Kevin Steele, the fact that he's been around so long, he's coached under Nick Saban, he's comfortable, they're comfortable with each other. This is going to be a relationship where, Kevin Steele is going to be able to, put his foot down and say, no, I think we should do it this way. And I think that Nick Saban has enough respect for him where, he'll implement some of that stuff. And so I think the guy that's actually calling the defense, having more of that freedom should help him. He can build it the way he wants to. He can run things the way he wants to in certain ways. I mean, it's still Nick Saban's defense, don't get me wrong. But it's just, I think that there will be a lot more on game days and stuff that Nick Saban trusts Kevin Steele to do that maybe wasn't always there with Pete Golding. So I think that that's probably the number one thing. And it's the fact that he demands a certain standard. I don't think he's an old school football coach. He's not trying to be anybody's best friend. He's going to coach them hard. He's going to love these guys, and build them up when he needs to, but he's going to be hard on them too. And he's going to have an expectation. He knows what it's supposed to look like. He's been at Alabama twice. This is his 3rd stint. He's been at some other successful programs. He knows what a successful defense looks like. I mean, that 2017 Auburn group comes to mind. Not the most talent across the board. They had a couple of really, really good players, but they were a good defense overall because they bought into Kevin Steele and what he wanted to do. And, they implemented that, and he had a vision and he executed it to perfection, in my opinion, or close to perfection. And so I think that, he's certainly going to he already is making a huge impact on the defense. You see it. Guys are playing with a lot more energy. They're a lot more aggressive coming downhill. And I think that in today's college football, there's worry. If you have guys, coming up too quickly, you got RPO stuff, play action, all these things that can really make you pay. But at the same time, Kevin Steele's going to take some chances when it's needed. But I think he also has a really good feel for just sometimes you got to let these talented guys go and let them play. And I think Steele's going to do that.
So last question I have is that when we saw Clemson lose to Duke this on Monday, was it? Yeah. So in the press conference, Dabo Swinney, when talking about Garrett Riley, said that Garrett Riley essentially needs to just learn the Clemson offense, and that's going to take time because he's a first-year coordinator for the Tigers. A lot of people took that as you're limiting Garrett Riley on what he does in his air raid base. Could we see anything like that with Steele or with Reese, where they will have to go to the Alabama offense, or do you think Saban is going to give them the freedom to do what they want to do?
I mean, it's going to be the Alabama way. I mean, I'll go ahead and tell you that. But at the same time, I think the fact that Tommy Reese knew that going in, he embraced it from day one. And Nick Saban listens to these guys. There's terminology that is going to stay the same. There's certain things that they're going to do that he's going to want that to continue. But then also these guys bring wrinkles and new things that can be implemented, and he respects them. He hired them for a reason. He's going to listen to them. And I think he's going to be a lot more hands-on with the defense, obviously, than the offense. So Tommy Reese, there's going to be certain aspects, but I think it was pretty much a collective effort. You saw Alabama on 3rd and shorts, 3rd and 1s, 3rd and 2s. They were running the football. I mean, and there was a clear commitment to, hey, we're big up front. We want to be able to run it down people's throats. We're not throwing the football on 3rd and 1. They know we're running it, and we don't care. We're going to do it anyways, and we're going to convert. And that's exactly what they did. This was MTSU. I understand that. We'll have to see how things look against Texas. But, That's something that Nick Saban wanted. Bill O'Brien, and I don't think it was all Bill O'Brien's fault. Like, I think it was more of a, could he trust Alabama's offensive line to get the push they needed to convert on 3rd and short? And he always couldn't do that. So he's like, I got Bryce Young. I got the best quarterback in college football. Let's throw it. I know it's the 40th time that we've thrown it. It's the 3rd quarter. Who cares? I trust his ability to convert here more than I trust the offensive line to create the push that they need to. So I think that, that's, who do you put that blame on? I understand it from both sides, but Tommy Rees is going to be a guy, sometimes I don't care that they're not doing it effectively right now. We're going to run it and we're going to do it in practice and everything else. We're going to make a commitment to being balanced offensively. And when I say balance, I don't mean you throw the football 50%, you run it 50%, which I think Alabama was pretty balanced under Bill O'Brien. It was, can you run the football effectively as well as throw the football effectively? Can you create balance that way? Can you win both ways? I think Bill O'Brien was committed to winning, throwing the football. I don't think he was, as committed to running it and doing whatever it took to get that right. So, I think that both Tommy Rees and Kevin Steele, they both understand what the deal is with Nick Saban, and I think it's going to work. And from everything we've seen so far, it seems to be working.
Absolutely. My last question before I take it back to Bill is Nick Saban, since he's been at Alabama, has had a great track record of giving his offensive coordinators the ability to get hired as a head coach somewhere else. You see with Jim McElwain, he went to Florida, now Central Michigan. Obviously, Kiffin went to Ole Miss after, even though he had head coaching stints before. And the same thing with Sark, but Sark went to Texas. Do you think that Rees is the next guy to go out, have success at Alabama, and then become a head coach somewhere else in the country?
Yes, I do. I absolutely do. And there are still question marks with Tommy Rees, according to a lot of people. And I do think, kind of like with Bill O'Brien with the offensive line that we were just talking about, I think Tommy Rees, he didn't have access at Notre Dame to everything that he has available to him at Alabama. Like a receiver, they had good receivers. They had some really good players. They didn't have the quality of talent at that position that he's gotten in Tuscaloosa. I mean, from a recruiting standpoint, does he have the 4 first-round receivers that Alabama had a couple of years ago? No. But I think he's got a lot of guys who have that kind of potential, and they've recruited the position extremely well. And it's just a matter of getting the development that they need out of it. And it's, having somebody that can, execute an offense that can take advantage of the skill sets. And I think with Rees having that on top of, I think you're still going to get the tight end play. Are they going to have a Michael Mayer this year? No. Amari Nablock he has the potential to be elite, but as far as being a complete tight end that can block and run and catch and do all the different things, Mayer was pretty special on that front. And I think that you got to recruit that guy. And I don't think that guy to that degree is on Alabama's roster right now. But you have a deep stable of tight ends. They feel really good about the development there with Danny Lewis and CJ Dupree and Amari Black and Robbie Oots. And so you've got you can still do the 12 personnel that he did in South Bend. You got the big offensive line filled with 5-star talent, a running back stable that's as deep as anybody in the country. And, a lot of it will depend on the quarterback play, but I think that you've got quarterbacks, really 3 of them, that you can win a lot of football games with. I think they're all good enough. Can you win a championship with all 3? I don't know. I guess time will tell. But I think that they feel pretty good about that position as well. So I think that he's going to have success. I think he is innovative. He's more innovative than people give him credit for. I just don't think he's always had the guys that he needed to do what he needed to do to have enough success to where he stood out in that way. And I think he's got that. And so if he just does what he needs to do with the talent he's going to have available, I certainly think the fact that he's young, he's a very hard worker. He's got the right approach, the right attitude. I do think he ends up being a head coach sooner rather than later.
Bill, do you have anything for our guest?
I have several. So I'm going to give you like 2 at a time. And since they're ones that I think sort of complement each other, hopefully, if I'm right. If not, then I apologize for pairing these up. So I wanted you looking at this once again, the game itself, Texas versus Alabama. A player on each team that isn't being discussed very much, like sort of maybe a player that is even a complimentary player, not a star, not someone who's an All-American, maybe a new player even. but you think will make an impact on the game on either side, both for Alabama and then for Texas. And then an aspect schematically, and maybe the two are related, that isn't being discussed enough in your mind that you think has a great impact on the outcome of the game when Texas uh, faces Alabama.
I think I think for Alabama and their side of things, I think Tim Keenan can have a big impact on the game. And the reason I say that is one thing, whether you're talking about LSU last year, you're talking about Tennessee, 2 games they lost, and it was for a variety of reasons. LSU didn't have the sort of commitment to running the football with their running backs that Tennessee did. But when they did, they had some success doing it. But they also implemented Jaden Daniels' legs, and he had a lot of success, close to 100 yards rushing, and he had a touchdown. Tennessee was able to run the football effectively, and that, pretty much at will whenever they wanted to. And then Hendon Hooker with his legs put strain on Alabama's defense. And then you had the receivers with Jalen Hyatt and all these other guys, and the spacing and all the difficulties that created. But one thing is, in those games, Alabama did not make LSU or Tennessee one-dimensional. And it's kind of like a Bill Belichick, Nick Saban approach is, Bill Belichick's approach has always been, we're going to take away your best option. We don't know, whoever that is. It could be a tight end, it could be a receiver, a running back, or we're going to completely eliminate your best guy, and you're going to have to beat us some other way. Nick Saban has always taken this approach, or at least, in most of the years that he's been at Alabama, you're not going to run the football against us. If you beat us, if you get the all-world talent at quarterback, or, the Steven Garcias of the world, who wasn't an all-world talent, but just had an outstanding day, that's how you beat Alabama before. But you were going to need to get dynamic play out of the quarterback position. Now, not only can you do that, Tennessee had Hendon Hooker. LSU, Jaden Daniels played, certainly good enough to win that game. He was not Hendon Hooker good, but he was good and effective. But I think that there's a renewed commitment to forcing offenses to be one-dimensional. And if you force them to throw the football, for some offenses, that's going to play right into their hand because they want to throw the football. That's in today's college football. That's the way that they're built. But it's in those crucial games, can you stop the run? And in this particular game, I think the Texas has a good offensive line. I understand there's still some things left to be proven, but I like the group overall. I think they got some talented running backs, especially with Cedric Baxter expected to play. He's kind of the game changer at that position, if I had to guess, but they have a deep stable with several other options as well. If you can take all of that away and you can put the game on the Quinn Ewers' shoulders, I'm not saying he's going to crumble because, they've got a lot of good receivers. They got an elite tight end, and he's a good quarterback. But, you put all of it on his shoulders, and I think that it's possible that he can make a mistake or two that can create the separation or the difference in this game. And I think that a big part of stopping the run and making them one-dimensional would probably be Tim Keenan.
Okay. My next question has to do with players who you may have perceived one way and now you're sort of seeing them differently. And obviously still early in the season. So you may still change your mind more. Like for me, it was Riley Leonard. It's like, okay. He didn't exactly stand on his head or, but he made the plays when they needed to be made. And of course, Brock and I know we talked about this with Penn State in the past with a quarterback who's somehow bad but clutch. No, it's a Penn State thing. It's like, how is he so bad for 90% of the game, and then it's 4th and 27. They converted, right? So sometimes there's a quarterback who has that. It doesn't have to be a quarterback, but what players have you seen? It could be SEC players, or even outside the SEC, who you're starting to see them differently. Like maybe you have one thing in your mind about this player, and now you're seeing them differently.
Obviously Jalen Milroe comes to mind. Just because I'm covering the program and such, and I thought that his limitations that I saw last year, if he didn't get it taken care of, I thought it could be catastrophic, and that's why I didn't think he would win the job originally. I thought that it was possible that he won the job, but it's why he wasn't ultimately my pick. You expect growth and development, but there was nothing that was coming from Nick Saban as far as going to recruit a transfer portal guy as soon as spring was over. I thought Jalen Milroe played fine. He had a lot of drops in the 8A game, but And there were some moments you wanted to have back. He had one of those plays that I was talking about where you're just like, what are you doing? And he threw an interception and, in his, and from the end zone. And, so with Jalen Milroe, I thought, okay, with his issues, could he win the starting job? And one thing, and one of the big things that stood out to me was I can't remember the Texas A&M game last year. He looked overwhelmed. I mean, from start to finish, he just looked like a deer in headlights. He wasn't seeing what he needed to see. And I've been there before, by the way. I was a young player once playing in high school, and I got my first start as a sophomore. And I will say this: I led the team in tackles that night, and my dad thought I played a great game because they kept calling me over the intercom. And it was because they were like, we can attack number 33 because he's awful. I get out there and everything I've been taught, just everything left me. Jalen Milroe had that type of performance last year where he seemed very panicked, didn't seem under control. And I couldn't remember. I've been trying to think of an example, and maybe there's one out there, but I just couldn't remember of an example of somebody who had that type of performance at the quarterback position, that's such a high pressure position, who was able to bounce back and be one of the, be a good enough player to not have those issues anymore. I will say Jalen Milroe, at least in week 1, looked like a guy who might not have those issues. He looked confident. And even when things went wrong, his body language was better. He seemed more sure of himself. And so that would be probably somebody. Riley Leonard's another great choice, by the way. That's a player that I'd heard that, Alabama could have some interest in the transfer portal. And I would have been curious to see what that would have looked like had he chose to come. But he's doing some great things. And then Sanders for Colorado. I wasn't sure how his game would translate up to this level of college football. And I could not have been more, I didn't say that he couldn't do it, but I was just concerned, will he be able to do it? And according to week 1, yeah, he's going to be just fine.
Yeah. He's just has, I think of sort of like Teddy Bridgewater and certain guys, and even what we saw with CJ Stroud. Some guys have just natural accuracy. The ball is where it's supposed to be. They did it when they were in 7th grade. They did it when they were in high school. They do it in college. They'll do it at the next level. Certain things translate. Accuracy tends to translate. Oh, I'll give you 2 examples of quarterbacks that. In fact, I even named a little facetious award after these 2, what I call the Yates Crompton Award, named after T.J. Yates and Jonathan Crompton. So I don't know if you remember these 2 quarterbacks. They're the year prior to their breakout years, people were literally calling for them to be at least replaced, and in some cases, well, something worse than replaced. I'll leave it at that. And because I remember T.J. Yates had on the message boards, on the Carolina message boards, his nickname was T.J. Yikes, and each of them managed to sort of right the ship at least a little bit, and both ended up playing a little bit in the NFL. Yates got even drafted, which if you'd
he was
asked
in the
me
NFL for a while, yeah,
right, he was there for like 8 or 9 years. If you'd asked me the year prior, it's like if he's in the NFL, it's because he's like maybe offensive quality control that eventually worked with the quarterback coach. I thought no way he'd ever even be a clipboard holder as a quarterback. So those are guys who I saw just look like the game was being played in another language. And then for Crompton, it was the arrival of Kiffin, right? I
Yep.
can't remember who the coach was. Was it Jeremy Pruitt prior to? No, it was. I can't remember the coach.
Butch Jones.
It was Jones. Thank you. Butch Jones is right. It was Butch Jones. So I don't know where to assign the blame necessarily because it was Butch Jones. But the year prior, I thought he was the worst starting quarterback at any Power 5 that I'd seen the previous year. And then the next year, of course, they have the 7-6. They win the loss 7-6 or whatever versus Alabama, and Crompton, to his credit, looked like, hey, this guy's a quarterback, and he didn't get drafted, but he did get picked up by, I can't remember which team, but somebody, and bounced around a little bit, had a cup of coffee in the NFL, which I thought he might at some point be bringing people coffee. So I was. Those are 2 guys that popped in my head when it's like people that you thought would. And we talked about Sean Clifford as being bad but clutch, or clutch but bad. Some guys, for whatever reason, can just utterly look like they should not be there, and then the play that has to be made, they make it. Sadly, I was the opposite. You talked about your exam. I mean, you were playing as a sophomore. As a sophomore, I might as well have been like an equipment manager. I was, first of all, I was very undersized. I was in my prime in college. I was 174, and it was a fight to get to 174. And I was a safety, and by safety I mean I played special teams. But yeah, you know what I'm talking about. So let's knock out my last couple of questions because you probably have a life you want to get back to, I assume. So you talked about some of Alabama's newcomers, and maybe you've named them already. But are there any other newcomers, players that whether they came via transfer or came via coming out of high school that you haven't already mentioned that we should be looking out for as this game approaches?
Well, I think the number one guy is Caleb Downs for sure. I mean, and I think by now everybody kind of knows who he is. He's I've said it all off season. He's a transformative piece for the secondary. I mean, just when you watch him on tape, there's nothing that he cannot do. He's great as far as coverage. He's willing to come up and run support. Very instinctual. Has the right stuff mentally. You can do a variety of things with him. You can play him in single, high, two, high, roll him down into the box, play him over a slot receiver. I think he could play and survive it as a perimeter corner if you needed him to, but I don't think he's ever going to be asked to do that. But he's a very versatile piece. He's got a winning mentality. He's always trying to get better. And I think that people saw, the start of what's going to be a very promising career for him against MTSU last week. In a game like this, I think he could also have a very important big role. Someone else, of course, is Caden Proctor, the left tackle, who is absolutely massive, 6'7". I think he's listed at 360 now on the roster, but I think he's now up to 369, according to Cole Kublik on the broadcast of the game this past Saturday. He's up to 369. And, I mean, he's a freshman. He got caught off guard, coming off of a snap on a blitzing linebacker, and he got rocked pretty good. It was definitely his welcome to college football moment. But overall, when's the last time Alabama had a tackle starting on its blind side? Probably Cam Robinson, I guess, who, was an impact player. And I think that there are better offensive linemen right now on this roster with Tyler Booker and J.C. Latham. But Proctor, as far as his ceiling, his natural length being 6'7", he's an athletic mover for a guy who's close to 370 pounds. And so there's going to be some growing pains, I'm sure. But he's certainly a player to keep an eye on. And Texas, the strength of their defensive front to me is with their interior guys, but their exterior guys are pretty good players as well. So I'll be curious to see how Proctor holds up. But those would be the two main guys. And then a Malik Benson, of course. There's so many receivers that it's hard to say what his role is going to be. He could end up having 0 targets tomorrow. But he was with the starting group. He's been, he's a JUCO addition, a 5-star JUCO addition for Alabama. Been a good player, very explosive, can win at all 3 levels of the field. And so I'll be curious to see what his role ends up looking like and if he can end up getting a little bit more involved than he was last week. He got a couple of targets and a couple of catches, but I think he's got some game-breaking ability if he can get the football in the right moments, and we'll just kind of have to see what happens.
Excellent. So I have like 2-3 more questions, and I'll just knock them out. So this is Brock's favorite thing because, as Brock mentioned, there's nothing he likes more than firing coaches. So I'm going to ask you to identify some coaches that, might be feeling a little heat on their seats. And then I'm going to fire some names at you that, whether or not you think they would fit in the SEC as head coaching material. They might have success. You already mentioned, obviously, a guy like Deion Sanders, who I think would have success coaching pretty much anywhere, especially a place where recruiting matters, right? As you mentioned, college. And I mean, there's young men who are starting at Power Fives right now who are looking at Colorado thinking, which, be that as it may. So who do you think might not finish out their contracts?
I would probably say that the two biggest right now, you say finish out contracts. If you're talking about just simply hot seat, because I think money plays into this, at least on one front. But the top two, Eli Drinkwitz there at Missouri, he would probably be a guy, who I would say his tenure is probably nearing an end unless he has a pretty good year this year. Jimbo Fisher at Texas A&M. A lot of pressure to right the ship last year. I mean, obviously they were moving clearly in the wrong direction. We'll have to kind of see what happens. But Jimbo Fisher, I would say that his seat's starting to warm up, but just all that guaranteed money. I don't know what the buyout would be at this point. Pretty sure, though, that Texas oil money would be willing to pay whatever they needed to if they decided to go in a different direction. Who would you go get? I don't know. But, when you got Texas coming into the SEC, Oklahoma as well, but, mainly Texas, and you're not going to have that conference brand as an advantage on the recruiting trail and stuff. I think, the powers that be at Texas A&M could get nervous and choose to go in a different direction if we don't start to see some visible improvement, particularly from the offense, because Jimbo Fisher's an offensive guy. The recruiting's been there, but there's been some question marks as to how that's been done. You've had some disciplinary issues. Some of these guys have left via transfer portal. That would be somebody that I would put up there. And then, I still think it's way too premature, but just knowing Florida and Florida fans, Billy Napier can't have what we saw against Utah. That's not going to fly. It's not just hey, they're not where they need to be yet. It's like you had some major coaching issues. Not enough players on the field in certain situations. It was ugly. And so I would say maybe not this year, but if they don't start showing some improvement, I could see him winding up on the hot seat sooner rather than later.
Got it. And that leads me pretty simply and easily to some names I'll throw at you. I'm a big fan of some coaches, and you can let me know if you think that they would. You mentioned Drinkwitz. I could see a guy like Willie Fritz, who's had success at Tulane, or Jeff Traylor, who I won't say, took the program from nowhere to somewhere, but certainly moved the program quite a bit at UTSA, and knows Texas well. And if you can recruit Texas, you can have success. Period. Right? No matter where you're coaching, if you can get even the third and fourth best players out of Texas consistently, you're going to have a certain amount of success if you can coach them up. I think those are a couple of guys that I think might translate to the SEC. What do you think of those two names that just threw at you?
Yeah, Fritz for sure. I would be curious. Would the big Texas schools, and you say big, you got Texas and Texas A&M if you're talking about SEC, which is, I guess, your question. So, yeah, it would be the two big ones. Would Texas at any point be willing to take the Tom Herman route again, going to one of the smaller programs in the state and, hiring their head coach who had a lot of success? I think that that's more of a Herman issue rather than just you can't do it. But I don't know if they would necessarily take that route again. But I think both would end up being good coaches. And you are always trying to find, right now it seems like that a lot of these SEC schools, they're wanting to get the big names to appease the fan base. Like Auburn, they went the Brian Harsin route the last time, and that ended terribly. And it was like, Hugh Freeze came with some controversy, but it needed to be Hugh Freeze. It needed to be Lane Kiffin. I don't know how much Deion Sanders was actually considered, but I think he should have been, and that would have been a huge, massive name. It would have brought a lot of energy to the program and stuff. So it seems like all these, LSU gets rid of Ed Orgeron, and it's like they're going after Lincoln Riley. They're going after Brian Kelly. They're going after the college football elites. I would say, Florida took the chance with Billy Napier being at Louisiana, and so far it hadn't worked out. But I think that that's a route that some of these programs should go to kind of be different. It's not going to be a great hire on day one, but I will say I understand. There's some concerns about Arkansas reaching its ceiling, but when they went Sam Pittman, everybody thought that was terrible. This was an offensive line coach who had never been a coordinator. But he was the right guy for that program. And I don't know who else they could go out and get right now at an Arkansas who's going to be a better representative of the university, who's going to be able to do what he's done with that program. And so, it was the right move and the right fit, even though it was very unorthodox. I think that some of these schools should maybe go and look at, some of these other places. And I think that if they would do that, there would be, some success there. I just don't know where those guys would come from and from which programs.
Gotcha. Pat Fitzgerald is now available. Now, I mean,
All
you
right.
mentioned.
All right.
Hold on, wait. You mentioned controversy. Clearly, some SEC schools are not that afraid of controversy. Um, in your opinion, obviously he couldn't work everywhere, but maybe a place like Vanderbilt, right? A place that sort of has a certain similarity where he's had success. Could you see him having success somewhere in the SEC?
Oh man. Could I see him having success? Maybe. I guess it would depend. So much of this is cultural fit. Like, just being in the South and recruiting the South. I think Clark Lee just, he made sense because he was a Vanderbilt guy, and he was a good defensive mind. And it was kind of, your Vanderbilt, exactly who are you going to go get? And so he ended up being, I think he was a good hire. I don't think he's ever going to be somebody that, builds Vanderbilt up to a point where they're in the top half of the conference, outside of maybe there might be one occasional year. But I think for Vanderbilt, you're in the SEC, you've got some limitations as far as, the academics and what that causes and money situation. And so for that program, he's a great hire. So with Pat Fitzgerald, I think it would be, I don't know that he would fit everywhere. And I'm trying to think of where he really would fit. And nobody stands out in particular, but at the same time, you are correct. If you know how to coach football and someone feels like they can win football games with you, they will not mind the controversy. That's for sure.
So
I would like to add that SEC fans want their teams to actually win games on U.S. soil. That's something Pat Fitzgerald has failed to do since the post-pandemic world. So, Pat Fitzgerald was a name you threw out, Bill, that I was surprised at. On all the other names that we've talked about, Pat Fitzgerald is a shocker.
The man won 100+ games. Whether you want to disparage the pre whatever pandemic, he won 110 games plus at Northwestern. I don't know if you give extra points for a degree of difficulty, right? Think about the hardest places to win in America. Right there with the service academies amongst FBS programs, like New Mexico State, the service academies, and then like Vanderbilt, Northwestern, right? I mean, somewhere in that top 7 or 8 hardest places to win, they're in there. And he won. He had, obviously some problems, especially towards the end. But
some problems, get term for the issues associated with Northwestern football. A problem is being, a head coach at Ole Miss and using your company phone to call escorts. That's a problem. Okay. A problem is letting your players get like free tattoos for autograph signing up in Columbus. That's a problem. Instilling a decades-long bullying campaign against your own players for which you have gone into their homes, their childhood homes, where they have grown up and told their parents, you can trust me with your son, and then throwing them to the wolves. That is much more than just a problem. So, Pat Fitzgerald does not belong anywhere near a college football field or high school, and definitely not. He can't win in the SEC. That's the problem. And I agree with you, Clint. Eli Drinkwitz, he's got to go. He's no Gary Pinkel. We know. I agree with you on Big Napier. I think A&M is so A&M screwed themselves by giving Jimbo an extension on top of his already large 10-year deal, which was just odd because all he did was beat North Carolina without their best players in the Orange Bowl. Sure, it's real easy when you have 2 high-level NFL graded running backs, just not on the field, against you. But again, that's neither here nor there. I think they're gonna go with DJ Durkin. I think they're grooming Durkin for that job.
Wait, hold on. Hold on. You just excoriated me for bringing up Pat Fitzgerald. Bizarro world.
First of all, I don't like DJ Durkin. I want to make that very clear.
It does.
No one. Well, someone does. College Station. See, first of all, if you have any type of moral, failure, I can't find the right term for it. I can't find the right synonym for what I'm trying to say. If you are morally unsound, you are perfect for Texas A&M, which is weird because the greatest head coach in A&M history is arguably R.C. Slocum, and he was morally sound all across the board. But it's clear that the Aggies don't care. And DJ Durkin is the only reason A&M has had success these past couple of years because his defense is built Jimbo out on a multitude of occasions. He fits. He has the look, he has the pedigree, and he's already in the building. You don't think he's pulling out Philip Fulmer right now? You don't think he's whining and dining boosters? You don't think he's getting close to the AD? You don't think he's ready to pull the plug? All right, whenever something happens with Jimbo Fishers, this is Tennessee all over again. This is Johnny. Thank you. This is Johnny Majors and Philip Fulmer all over again. I'm telling you right now, Durkin is making moves behind his back to become the head coach of Texas A&M. Clint, I know that was something that was outrageous. You have a much better outlook on the SEC in general. What are your thoughts?
As far as Texas A&M is concerned, I wonder, and I'm not saying that you're wrong in what you're saying, because I do think from an X's and O's standpoint, he does have the look of it. Essentially, what you're saying is that you think he's pulling a Kevin Steele at Auburn with Gus Malzahn, because that was the rumors. I guess he's Alabama's defense coordinator now, so I can't criticize too much, but we're having fun. But with Durkin, I think there's real concern from A&M as far as Texas coming into the SEC, and just especially, if Texas wins tomorrow or Texas starts having any sort of momentum, they could lose tomorrow and still win the Big 12 and still make the college football playoff if it's a respectable game tomorrow. But it's with the concern, is DJ Durkin the kind of name that a program like A&M feels like, if you just elevate your defensive coordinator and now he's your head guy, can he go compete with what is becoming a powerhouse in Texas if they've got things moving in the right direction under Steve Sarkisian, who's a very, exciting, innovative offensive coach? Maybe. I don't think that would be the worst decision that they could make. I don't know if that they would make that decision. That would be my only concern, is I feel like they would be the ones, kind of like LSU. LSU was not settling for Billy Napier. Like, he was considered a really good coach, and he would make a lot of sense. And he was in Louisiana. There was so many reasons for LSU to go after him. They're like, no, we're LSU. We're going to go get the best of the best. First, it was Lincoln Riley, and then they settled on Brian Kelly, who was considered one of the better coaches in college football. And so I don't know if Texas A&M, with a concern with Texas, if they would say, hey, we're Texas A&M, we've got the money to do it, we're going to we're swinging for the fences. And is DJ Durkin the fences? I don't think so, but I think it would be a quality hire, I guess. I certainly agree with you there.
Yeah, as long as, players don't mind, practicing the heat to the point of heat exhaustion. Yeah,
Texas is hot.
Yeah,
Texas is hot.
DJ Durkin always has a great track record in, player safety. But here's the thing about what you just said. Brian Kelly is the most overrated coach in all of college football. And I think that he's hit his ceiling at LSU in his first year. I don't think that he's going to continuously be able to bring in a quarterback to the level of what Jalen Daniels has been able to produce consistently. He didn't do it at Notre Dame, which is obviously a hard place to do. But if you look at his time at Cincinnati and at Notre Dame, there's not really a lot of examples of him going against quality opposition and winning, or going against quality opposition and putting in an excellent performance consistently. We never got to see Cincinnati play against Florida in that Sugar Bowl because he already left to Notre Dame. When Notre Dame plays in New Year's Six bowl games, they lose, and they lose badly. Remember that 2012 national championship game? I think it was 2012. It might be 2011. I forget the year. But the one where Bama just smoked them, right? Remember, Matt Taylor, Heisman runner up. You have Everett Golston. Notre Dame was hot. Stock was high in Notre Dame. Bama comes in. They already lost to Johnny Manziel that year. And guess what? Just boom, just smoked them. Then you look at when they played Bama again in 2020, smoked them. Look at when they played Clemson, smoked them. They put up a goose egg on the board against that Clemson team. What example is there to say that Brian Kelly is going to be that guy? I don't know. There's not really a point to this. I just love to shit on Brian Kelly. It's actually my favorite pastime. Baseball, shitting on Brian Kelly when it comes to America's pastime. Going back to what we were talking about earlier. I don't think that Texas A&M understands how much of a failure they've been in the SEC until right now. They have, since they lost to Texas on that Justin Tucker game winner the last time they played, they have been arguably the better program out of those two and possibly the best program in the state of Texas, and they've done nothing with it. They have 0 SEC championship game appearances. They only have 2 New Year's Six wins. That was the Cotton Bowl during Johnny Manziel's Heisman year, and then obviously 2020 year against North Carolina. Thank you. North Carolina. Since then, what have they really accomplished? Yeah, they sent first rounders to the league, but everyone does that. There's really nothing been done under Jimbo Fisher. Has Jimbo Fisher's won double-digit games once at Texas A&M, or has he even done it? I can't remember if the COVID year they got to 10. No, they've won double-digit games 0 times in his 6 years at Texas. They lost to Appalachian State at home last year, who had to throw a Hail Mary just to beat Troy the following week and had an average year, and honestly a pretty bad year compared to Appalachian State standards. In the same time, Texas has won 10 games. Yeah, they played the Big 12, so it's a little different, but still, they've won 10 games. They played in the Big 12 championship game. They won Sugar Bowl, where they beat Georgia by, I think, 10 points. It might have been a 1 point. I don't know. I remember Georgia was favored by 10 in that game, and Texas just put it to them. I think if you're Texas A&M, you got to be very scared right now because you are slipping quickly. I do want to add that I don't trust Brent Venables. I don't trust Steve Sarkisian. I don't trust Jimbo Fisher. I don't trust majority of the coaches in the SEC, but especially those 3. I think.
Can I ask? Let me ask. Who do you trust? Because I mean, I don't think that you've been wrong on anything you've said necessarily. I wouldn't say I agree with everything, but I think you've been pretty brutally honest. But I don't think anything's out of pocket. But my question then becomes, because I ran into this situation when I talked to a lot of my Auburn friends when they're like, we got to get rid of Gus Malzahn, and my argument was I don't disagree. I think that you're in some way settling for less if you keep him, but at the same time, who are you going to go get that's going to do better than Gus Malzahn? And now that Brian Harsin was a big swing and a miss, that compared to Gus it wasn't even anywhere close. In a lot of ways, I think Hugh Freeze is Gus Malzahn, even though I think Hugh's he's much more better suited for today's college football as far as the way that he runs his offense and the innovativeness and all that stuff. But you're looking at a coach that you're trying to get that can compete with Alabama and compete with Georgia as well, get some wins every once in a while, keep it respectable. But that's what Gus Malzahn was doing. I mean, he was beating Alabama fairly consistently compared to other programs, and he was having some success. I mean, he went to the national championship. Like, are you expecting Auburn to be Georgia or Alabama, and you're not going to stop until you get that guy? And so I ask, because the question that I always ask them is, okay, if not all these people that you're talking about, then who?
Yeah, that's the thing. Well, one, probably my dad is the guy I trust the most, but that's just side story. And then everybody else kind of goes in the same boat of people I trust, which is I don't trust them at all. But that's what I know about. As honest, candid conversation about football. When you look at the SEC, there are like 4 coaches that I trust to be successful consistently. 2 of them are obviously Smart and Saban. Like, that's a no-brainer. Another guy is
Heupel.
Yeah, Heupel, definitely. But what is his name? Mark Stoops, right?
Oh yeah, Mark Stoops.
Yeah.
For what can
at Kentucky, yeah, like that's easily him. Cadillac Williams, surprisingly, this guy I trust. From what we've heard, Cadillac just didn't want like the head coaching job now. Like, he wants to continue to improve. That's why they didn't elevate him. So I can give Auburn a little slack on that. Hugh Freeze, like you mentioned, is Gus Malzahn with a higher probability of causing a scandal that's going to put Auburn on probation for about 3 years. Right? Like, listen, there's a lot of shady stuff that can go down in Bama, just the state of Alabama, that can get covered up. But you start poking around the wrong places, and things are going to come to light pretty quickly. I like Sam Pittman in Arkansas. I think he's a perfect coach for Arkansas, but I think Arkansas knows that they're not going to be competing for a national title under him. But at the same time, Arkansas is not trying to compete for a national title right now. They're just trying to go back to New Year's Six, something they haven't done since Bob Petrino.
Absolutely.
So when it comes to all these coaches, I like Vanderbilt's coach, Clark
Lee.
Thank you. I'm horrible with names. Good Lord.
It's all good.
I think that I've said this before this season. I think Vanderbilt has a good chance of going to a bowl game this year. I think that they can win at least 6 games. I think you're gonna be surprised at some of the stuff they pull off with what's been a downtrodden SEC. The problem that I have is that we've already seen the flaws of these coaches that I don't like. Brett Venables is still a big question mark because obviously last year was so awful. You gotta think to yourself that's not gonna happen again. And they smoked Arkansas State, so that's a positive sign. But Dylan Gabriel cannot throw a dot for his leg. It's always a lift on the ball. And when you go against SEC defensive backs, that might not always work. That pocket may not be there, or it might close a lot faster than you anticipate. So I do have some major concerns about Oklahoma. Also, I think Jeff Levy's overrated. But again, I had to know that. Yeah, so Steve Sarkisian is Armenian, but he also might be part snow cone because the way he melts when the pressure gets turned up a little bit. Jimbo Fisher, we've already saw what he is. Couple coaches that I think can come in and make some major differences. We already mentioned two of them, which was Jeff Traylor, who I love, and not Pat. Who was it, Bill?
And Willie Fritz was the other one.
Willie Fritz, right? That's it, not Pat Fitzgerald. I think another coach that come in, depends on how he does this year at Marshall, is Charles Huff, who Bill and I have been on for a long time.
Yep.
A guy that I've had since I cover Hawaii football. I have an opportunity to see this man up close as J.J. Kinney out of Texas State. I think the fact that no one hired him out of Incarnate Ward besides Texas State is a massive oversight on the talent that he in the FCS and to the coaching talent there as well. He was smoking the FCS last year with Lizzie Scott Jr., and I think that he should
I was surprised because he lost Cameron Ward, and at a place like that, the fact that they continued to do well after losing that caliber of talent, I definitely agree that he should have been courted by a lot more programs than Texas State for sure.
Yes,
agreed.
Thank you. We're all agreeing, but the good part is he's establishing his route into Texas right now. He already has that base plate. He played at Tulsa, I believe, in college under Todd Graham.
Yep.
Todd Graham is for what you want to say about him, he's notorious at being able to recruit that area in general. And coaching guys come out of him all the time, most notably Mike Norvell, who's now at Florida State. And the last coach that I think that nobody's talking about in this country for no good reason is Jed Fish out in Arizona. I think people forgot how horrible the Wildcats were in the post-Rich Rodriguez era under Kevin Sumner. Not only does he have a great team going, he's going to play Mississippi State this week in Starkville. So we're going to have a chance to see them there. He has a tremendous offense. Jaden Delora, Jacob Cowley, and Arizona signed a 5-star recruit in Terratoa McMillan. If he can recruit all that out of Tucson, I think you put him in the SEC. I think he goes to work. I think that he can put in some massive performances.
Very likable guy.
Very likable guy.
Yeah.
Love listening to that guy speak. And when you look at the guys that are in the SEC right now, I think he's a better coach than probably half of them.
That's fair. Yeah. I mean, this is the problem with the SEC. It's like I mentioned. It's the fact that everybody wants the big names. Because they want to win the hire at the front end when they make the hire rather than winning the long game with getting the right guy in place. They want fans to be happy with the guy that they bring in. And that's great. If you sometimes you're Auburn and you try to get, Brian Herson had no business in the SEC. He hadn't recruited the area. I mean, he came from a program where he did some really good things, but that program had already kind of been built prior, with Chris Peterson, and just that never made sense to me whatsoever. You kind of look for the good in any hire that gets made, but other than, so you see those kind of, not swing for the fences, but just try to find some unorthodox, kind of out of nowhere, guy who ends up coming in and making some waves. Billy Napier, even though he coached under Nick Saban, he's been at some very successful, places other than just Alabama. He had a lot of success at Louisiana, but he's that guy where you say, okay, we're not going to swing for the fences. We're going to go get a very good, well-respected lower tier head coach, or lower tier is in coaching at a smaller program. So far, that has not worked out, even though I'm still hoping that he's able to bounce back and get that program on the right track. And it's like, LSU with their first year success under Brian Kelly. And I think you could be right. And they could have already hit their ceiling. But the fact that they immediately get back on the map after the Ed Orgeron, the way that ended after national championship, it just seems like that these programs, they're all about, if you're Vanderbilt, you're going to go get who you can get. If you're, Arkansas wanted a lot of different people, including Lane Kiffin. They got told no a bunch. They quote unquote settled on Sam Pittman. It was a different hire. Nobody really liked it. Ended up being the right man for the job. But a lot of these programs just seem to be targeting the big names. I would like to see some of the guys that you're talking about get an opportunity, because if you can get the recruiting side of it, recruiting in the Southeastern Conference, it's a different beast completely. It's different, as far as the competition, as far as the recruiting stuff is concerned, the demands of the job, it's a different beast in the Southeastern Conference. But if you can handle that side of things, there's some really good coaches out there in college football, and I would love to see some of them get an opportunity in, the best conference.
Yeah, I could not agree with you more. The problem that I'm having personally is we've seen some of these lower coaches come in and not have success. But we've also seen them come in and have tremendous success compared to the big name hires. I think Texas is kind of a prime example. You see what happened with Steve Sarkisian, and you look at Tom Herman's track record at Texas. Texas was awful under Charlie Strong. There's no other way to put it. Who was a big-time hire. Obviously, he won national championship with Florida's defensive coordinator, beat Florida in the Sugar Bowl with Louisville. Teddy Bridgewater was his quarterback, came out of Texas, didn't work out. Tom Herman comes in, goes 7-6 with a bowl win, 10-4 Sugar Bowl win, 8-5 Alamo Bowl win, and then the last year, he doesn't even play a 12-game schedule, goes 7-3 with the Alamo Bowl. I think if Tom Herman is the head coach of Texas in 2021, Casey Thompson was his guy for a reason. I think Texas would have had a much better year than Sark's first year, where they didn't even go bowling that year. And even last year, there's not really like a marquee victory Texas had except their win against Kansas State. And even that isn't that big, because once again, it is Kansas State. They can only do so much because they don't have the depth to be able to constantly be at 100% every single week. I think some of these smaller school guys, like Sam Pittman, is working out. I'm not gonna go all across the board, but I'm gonna bring up the Will Muschamp perspective, because everyone was high on Muschamp. Muschamp was supposed to be taken from Mac Brown at Texas. Great defensive mind. Texas defense was incredible. I was flying to the ball when he was there. Goes to Florida, you know what happens. Goes to South Carolina, we know what happens. I feel like a lot of these big time coaches are following the Will Muschamp kind of tree, and unfortunately, I think a lot of these programs, when they hire these big name coaches, they're trying to get to what was instead of realizing what is. When Texas A&M hired Jimbo Fisher, they wanted what was, which what was is that national championship team. What is a guy that couldn't get back to that. He got blown out by Oregon the following year, a year in which Jameis Winston pulled like 8 games out of the fire for the Seminoles throughout that whole year. Even after that, he was not good at Florida State anymore. He couldn't compete against Dabo Swinney and Clemson. And quite frankly, he was struggling to even make the ACC championship game majority of the time that he was there. Clemson, North Carolina was on the rise at that time. Even Duke had a couple good years with David Cutcliffe during that era. And I just don't know who's that big name you can bring in right now that wouldn't fall into that what was instead of what is category. I don't see it. Also, Lance Leopold, he's playing right now. He deserves an opportunity to get a bigger job as well for what he's done at the University of Kansas, was at the University of Buffalo, and the Wisconsin Whitewater before that. That's just how I feel. Do you have any thoughts, Clint? Just chopping it up.
Yeah, I mean, it's so. I completely agree with the Will Muschamp side of things, and it's like you get a lot of retread. And what's interesting is that, look at just some people are built for the SEC and some people aren't. Like you look at Gus Malzahn, he's doing pretty good things at UCF. Tom Herman, Clay Helton, they go to some of these smaller programs. Lane Kiffin, when he went to Florida Atlantic, I think there's something to be said as far as these smaller programs hiring somebody that used to be a really big name. Because from a recruiting perspective, if you've got the former USC head coach or the former Texas head coach or the former Auburn head coach, that can help you land bigger players at a smaller program. But with those guys, and while Gus Malzahn is doing pretty well at UCF, or at least up to this point, will he get another shot in the SEC? I don't know. will Tom Herman get another shot at a major program? I mean, he had some other stuff other than football that was kind of a concern, but it is an interesting debate and an interesting question. And what I will say is that there's nobody out there right now that is a clear cut. This would be the guy that an SEC program would go after. But because a lot of your top biggest name head coaches are already in the SEC. But on top of that, I will say this: I don't think anybody was putting Lincoln Riley as a gettable coach until he went to USC. Like, I don't think we heard about LSU trying to pull him away. If they would have pulled him, that would have been, the same conversation as USC. But it's like that massive top 5, top 7, top 8 coach in college football. Brian Kelly is considered up there in the top 10 as far as coaches. Being at a place like Notre Dame, you typically wouldn't expect that kind of name to be able to get pulled away. But he knew there were limitations at Notre Dame that wouldn't be there at LSU, and so he made the jump. Lincoln Riley, he liked the Southern California lifestyle, and some people think he was trying to dodge the SEC. I don't know how true that is or not, but for one reason or another, he was willing to make the jump from major college program to another major college program. And that was very shocking. There might be somebody out there like that, but I don't know, who that would be right now for sure.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point. And before I start insulting people for no reason, you're not like a junior or a third or like a fourth or anything like that, right? Or are you?
No.
Okay. Well, Tom Herman is. He's a well, not juniors necessarily, but anyone that has like a third, like he's Tom Herman the third. Anyone that's a third always has a weird kind of personality. Like RG3 is kind of the prime example of it. Like he just be saying things that just not be making it makes sense, but like it shouldn't. And that's from what I've heard through my inside kind of guys, that Tom Herman has an odd personality. I think we all remember the pitch chart, the hydration chart. That is ridiculous. Like I get the logic, but please don't put this in the locker room. Like that's not what you want. That's not what you want to see. When you come in after a hard day of practice. But I think Tom Herman could find himself back into the big show because he checks on the box. Offensive minded, great background resume. He learned from a bunch of great coaches, and he's had success before. Also, whenever you look at someone's resume, and if they coach at Texas, there's got to be a big asterisk because winning at Texas means a lot differently than winning at other places around the country.
It is.
Because you got to jump like 13 more hurdles at the University of Texas than you do at a bunch of other places. Because Texas has too many people with too many opinions that think that their opinions matter because they have a lot of money. And unfortunately for a lot of them, it does. But again, it's not an anti-Texas rant, even though that's a whole nother episode. Wow, I just really don't like Texas. Good Lord. But I think Herman comes back. The question that I have for you when it comes to the big scope of things is, how does Texas become a team that can compete for an SEC championship when they haven't been able to compete for a Big 12 championship since Matt Brown left, outside that 1 year they went to the championship game?
I think it's going to be easier than you think. I mean, that's my opinion. I was pretty when they made the announcement that Texas and Oklahoma were coming. My immediate response is Texas is going to be a problem at some point, and it's probably coming sooner rather than later because what you've done now, there will always be limitations due to booster involvement and things like that. I completely agree until they take a step back. I will say this: Nick Saban, if he would have went to Texas, he would have never stood for any of this. I don't know how much Sark puts up with and how much he doesn't. I couldn't really answer that question, but you're now mixing the Texas brand with one of the best recruiting hotbeds in all of college football with that SEC patch. And I think a lot of your big name players that were from that area that wanted to stick around, they started going to Texas A&M because they wanted to play in the best conference. They wanted to play against the best. I mean, all the recognition, it didn't go to the Big 12. Big 10 certainly up there as well, but it didn't go to the ACC. If you want to play against the absolute best, they tell you to go to the SEC. And if they don't, they tell you to go to the Big 10. And so Texas A&M having that brand, that conference brand, on top of being able to convince players to stay home, you don't have to go to Alabama hours and hours away. You can stay right here and you can play for a dominant program. They were expecting to build a dominant program, especially under Jimbo Fisher. Well, even with Kevin Sumlin, though, they were expecting the same thing eventually. But, it was that argument. And I think this is the big reason why A&M is so concerned about Texas coming into the SEC is because now they don't have that advantage. That was the one thing they had on Texas, was the fact that they had that SEC logo on their patch, on their jerseys, and they could say, we play against the absolute best week in and week out. No one sends players to the NFL to the same degree that the SEC does, all these things. And now Texas, who has a ton of money at their backing in a new NIL era, we think they've got the right head coach in place. They don't. They'll probably swing and try again. And they're probably pretty confident they could pull a lot of people. But they're gonna, between the money, the recruiting hotbed, and the Texas brand, and the fact that it's like, hey, help us get Texas football back. That was something that Nick Saban was able to preach during his early times at Alabama. Alabama had been that program for so long, and it had not been that program in quite a while. It's like, help us bring Alabama back. Let's get Alabama's brand back on the map. Texas is a very popular program. And so I could totally see that combination of factors helping them become really, really good, really, really quick. And I think I understand that you disagree, and that's totally fine. We don't have to agree on everything, but I think this roster today, compared to the last 5 or 6 or 7 years, is more ready to step into the SEC than it's been, for sure. Is it where it needs to be? Probably not. But it's clearly trending in the right direction. They're starting to get some really good football players at some of these positions. And I think that, that's just a result of having Steve Sarkisian, who's a very respected head coach. I mean, you pull guys like Arch Manning just because he wanted to play for Sark. Bryce Young wanted to play for Sark. It's his reputation, but it's the fact that it's Texas. And so I do think they're going to be a big problem at some point.
See, actually, surprisingly, I agree with you on basically everything you just said outside of the fact that they're going to be a problem in the SEC as they are right now. I think that last year they had a top 5 roster if they were already in the SEC for Texas. So the problem is that they just can't ever put together. And that comes down to coaching staff, and that also comes down to the influence that the boosters have. The thing is, I think that boosters are slowly starting to loosen their grip because it's been so long that Texas hasn't been competitive that they're starting to realize, first of all, a lot of them are getting old real quick because it's been over.
There's a lot of Jerry Joneses out there.
A lot of Jerry Jones. A lot of dudes in the 80s. They're peaking 81, 82. They know that time is not on their side, and they want to see Texas back on the pedestal. Think about it. If you have a lot of money in your early 60s and you just watch Texas win in 2004, the national championship, you think it's going to be glory days headed forward. Fast forward 20 years, and now it says 60 or 80, and you all haven't won nothing besides going back to the national championship game, obviously in 09. I think there's only 2 head coaches in this world that can make Texas competitive in the SEC. And everyone is going to hate me for it because everyone's going to think, Brock, you're an idiot. But that's how I feel. I know, Bill, this is going to be one of those moments. That is Urban Meyer and Ed Orgeron. And the reason why is because...
Why don't you throw Art Briles in there while you're at it, Brock?
Well, first of all, Art Briles never had a defense at Baylor, so that's the big. That's why they never made the college football playoff. That's why Ohio State jumped them because they didn't have a defense. Didn't have TCU, right? But that's Urban Meyer, regardless of how poor the players are morally, is able to keep them in line enough for a 15-game season, and that's all you need to win a national championship, right? And then Ed Orgeron, as we know, is one of the best recruiters in the country. As we enter this new era of NIL, transfer portal and stuff, a lot of these guys are going to get similar offers from the big schools. But those coaches have that special, how should I say, je ne sais quoi, that will make a recruit buy into the quote-unquote Longhorn way and want to play for Texas. Keep in mind, and I don't know if you're from Texas, so I'm not trying to offend you, but Austin, Texas, and the rest of Texas is very, very different. And nobody outside of Austin, outside of the 2 patches here in the alumni, of course, likes the Longhorns. So you got to reach something that's bigger than just the brand, in my opinion, of the team brand and the conference brand in order to bring in the talent and the dudes that love football enough for them to be able to compete against Georgia, against Bama, against things like that. And partly, I think that all starts with the coach's mindset. As I previously mentioned, and I've written about a lot, I think Sark has that mindset, that, for lack of a better term, that FU mindset that coaches need to have to compete at the University of Texas.
Well, I do think that I don't with Ed Orgeron. I think one of the big issues at Texas in general has just been, recruiting has not been that big of an issue. I mean, they're up there. They might not be number one or number two, which means that when you get to the college football playoff, you might not be able to compete with some of the other talent. But when it comes to the Big 12, they've out recruited pretty much everybody. Oklahoma's certainly been up there as well, but I mean, they should be kind of, destroying everybody from a talent perspective. I think it's talent evaluation on the recruiting side of things. Like, there are a lot of high school recruits from the state of Texas who are maxed out from a development standpoint that are rated highly, and they get to Texas and they don't develop like they need to because they're already maxed out. That's one of the issues that you do have in Texas is the programs. I mean, it's like a small college program with all these high school programs in the state of Texas. And so you deal with that issue for sure. It's talent evaluation, getting guys who have not reached that ceiling, who still has a lot of room to grow and develop. And then it's, so with Ed Orgeron, you would need to, it's not just about who you're pitching to get to come to your program, it's picking the right guys. And then with Urban Meyer, I actually agree with you. I do worry, like watching that Swamp Kings documentary, you realize kind of what made him successful, as far as just kind of the threats that he would make players. It's what he kind of tried to pull in Jacksonville, and it failed miserably because it's a different level. These cats are getting paid. They're kind of grown men at this point. They're not kids trying to get developed. Like, they're, young adults to some of them are, in their 30s, and they're like, hey, I'm not about this. But I also think that that's kind of trickled down to the college game. Like, I think that's something that Nick Saban's very weary of. You can't treat players like you used to treat them, as far as the way that you get onto them, the discipline. It's a different generation. They haven't had that tough love, that tough coaching a whole lot. And so they don't respond to it extremely well. And that's what worries me about Urban Meyer. Now, granted, he was doing it just a few short years ago. I don't know that anything's drastically changed in the last, 3 or 4 years. But, I do agree that if you're Texas and Sark does not work out, that would be a big name guy. He's got a lot of controversy attached to him at this point. But, one thing's for sure, he has built programs on the college level at multiple places that were extremely successful. You can't ignore that.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with everything you just said. I think Urban Meyer gets an asterisk because kids saw what the success he had.
I saw what you're doing there with the word asterisk. Okay, a little too clever there.
Okay. No, but real quick, Urban Meyer culturally is still in the minds of a lot of kids because when they were growing up playing Pee Wee, that's when Ohio State was rolling people. So that's why I think that Urban Meyer can get away with things other coaches can. Why I like those guys is they're great recruiters, but they build great staffs, and that's something that I don't like. Obviously, the last 3 years after the national championship was tough, but he also lost Joe Brady to Carolina, and then he lost Aranda to Baylor. Both of guys could come free real soon, for a multitude of reasons. And then obviously we see the coaching staff that Urban Meyer has had throughout his entire career, from Utah all the way to Ohio State.
And
I'm not a big
for that.
Yeah, exactly. And Bowling Green too. So that's where he first implemented his spread offense under, I think, John L. Smith is where he got it from when he went to visit him at Michigan State. Well, long story short, Kyle Flood, obviously you were Alabama guy, so you can speak more on him. I don't really believe in him as a coordinator. And I don't know how much influence he has on the play calling. Pete Kowalski, it's really hard to defend that dude anymore. Texas has some dudes in that defense, and they've been poor at it. I don't know. I think it's all going to come to a head, obviously, this Saturday when we get a chance to see these teams go live, and we're all just in the world of hypotheticals for the past 2 hours and just also shooting the shit. But it's like, I just don't see how this works out for Texas the way they're currently constructed. We could come Saturday and Texas could roll Bama, and I just got to eat everything I just said, which that's a big possibility. But do you have any? I don't had you for so long. We really appreciate your time. Do you have any last comments about everything I just said? Because I know I've said some outrageous things.
Yes, and I do want to once again. Brock puts me in the position at least once every show. I want to make it known, of course, that the words, views, thoughts, feelings, and actions of one Brock Vieira represent only his own words, thoughts, views, actions, and feelings, and do not at all represent the thoughts, views, feelings, actions, or viewpoints of Team MBS Media. So, yes, we're going to let you go back to your life. But so we do want to score a prediction. And what other week 2 games do you have on your docket and why? And yes, if you did want to respond to Brock, you certainly may, but you are not required to.
Score for me, I started off yesterday. I'd kind of been talked down a little bit, and I was sitting at a 31-23. And then we put out our staff score predictions, and I flipped a field goal from Texas to Alabama. So my official score prediction right now is 34-20. And granted, I understand that on paper, it should probably be a lot closer than that. My gut feeling is telling me that Alabama's going to use this as a statement game to say that they're back and they can still bully really. Because see, Nick Saban built the program initially on they would face these caliber teams that looked really good on paper. They were number 11 in the country or number 9 or number 14 or sometimes in a national championship like Notre Dame, you're the number 2 team in the country. And they would face Alabama, and Alabama would just push them around for 4 quarters and kind of toy with them. And I'm not saying that they're going to do that and run Texas off the field. That's why I'm only predicting 34-20. But I do think that Alabama could use this as an opportunity to kind of reestablish themselves as a program that's capable of doing that. So that's the score prediction. As far as games that I'm paying attention to, I'm interested in Notre Dame and NC State. Sam Hartman in week 1, or excuse me, I guess week 0. Really impressed with him. Want to see how he continues to grow and develop. Ole Miss versus Tulane. Obviously, Alabama's got Ole Miss in a couple of weeks. Tulane's a very serviceable, good group of 5 school. And then you've got the 2, I guess, SEC teams, SEC games going on this weekend between Auburn and Cal and Texas A&M at Miami. Obviously, I don't think Miami's a world beater or anything, but they're a decent, solid team and program. Let's see how A&M looks against a program of that caliber compared to some of these smaller ones, and let's see how the offenses develop. So those are probably the biggest 4 games I'm keeping an eye on.
Okay, excellent. Okay, once again, we have taken up way too much of your time. Tell, please, the people, Mr. Lamb, where they can find your work, where they can follow you, and what kind of things you're cooking on next.
Yeah, you can follow me at Clint R. Lamb on Twitter if you want. You can also, Bama Online, BOL. I do a lot of written content for them. I do video content for the On3 Roundtable. We actually just started a Bama Online YouTube channel as well. So I'm going to be contributing on that front. But really just, I pretty much, if it's not Twitter, we got the Roundtable message board over at Bama Online, a great Alabama community. Would highly recommend that anybody go subscribe and join and be a part of the community where the staff is on there all the time talking football, answering questions, a lot more so than I think your typical staff would be on a message board. We like enjoying and we enjoy engaging in the conversation, things like that. So certainly would recommend if you haven't already to go sign up and join in on the conversation. But if not, if you're not an Alabama fan or you just, I'm also on Twitter and I don't mind sharing my takes, and I like having fun with Twitter. It's kind of my outlet. I pick fun at other, fan bases and stuff. It's all, or other teams. It's all in good fun. But you can certainly follow me there and we can have a good time.
Yes. And if you end up following Brock, you will see some takes, Clint. You may want to.
Hey, I've learned that today. That's for sure. I mean, yeah, I feel like I've gotten all the takes, and you know what? I respect the fact that you've got an opinion and you don't back down from it. I respect that.
No, that's a nice way of saying that I completely disagree with you, and you got your head up your hoo-ha.
No, I respect anybody that's willing to stick a flag in the ground, because I'm not necessarily that way naturally. I try to kind of, I'll have a take, but I try to walk a line where it's like I'm not you know, and you could end up being really wrong sometimes, but at the same time, though, I'm sure that you can acknowledge that you know when you are wrong, and I'm sure you're right about a lot of this stuff too. So, mad respect on that front.
Much
Yeah.
appreciated, brother.
Yeah. Brock makes it interesting for me, Clint. So once again, I will. I remember being told a long time ago. Shout out to Command Sergeant Major Mackey, who I knew as a very, very young man, and he told me there are old soldiers and there are bold soldiers, but there are very few old bold soldiers, young man. But but yes. So on behalf of Team ABS Media, once again, Clint, we cannot thank you enough for giving way too much of your time. I would like you to know that we now are setting you free to do whatever it is you'd like to do, and we close out this show. Um, I just want to thank you so much. And if you are of any interest in Alabama, or really SEC at all, because Alabama sort of is the stir that still kind of stirs things in the SEC. Even if you're a Georgia fan, you like trolling Alabama fans, you should definitely hop on to all of the available uh, Bama Sports, Bama Online, On Three, or I guess On Three is sort of the umbrella, and On Three is doing great work. I sort of remember when On Three sort of popped up. I was searching for something else, like who is they? Who is that? What? Because I didn't know what they were at first. Like, oh, it's like okay. So they've come on fast, and I've come to respect their work, particularly in the transfer portal world. On Three has some of the best transfer portal stuff I've ever seen. So shout out to whoever does your transfer portal stuff at On Three.
For sure.
It's the best.
Yeah.
Thank you once again on behalf of my that way the other way, Bill. On behalf of my co-host Brock Vieira and Team BS Media, Clint. Once again, I cannot thank you enough. We will do this again, and we will invite you back probably before the Iron Bowl or something. We'll pick a game. We'll bring you back to break it down. We will not, however, keep you on for this long because this is actually this should probably is against the law. So once again, I thank you for your talent, your time, and your attention. We will do this again someday. Take care.
Absolutely.